This is the 7 Footsteps podcast, hosted by Jordan and Ruan van Jordan. Thanks for tuning in with us today. As always, we pray that our conversation has value to all our viewers. Now, without any further ado, let's get into another thought-provoking discussion. Welcome to our podcast. Wasn't that a great intro?
Oh, Ruan. It was his idea.
So today we are going to continue with our discussion on the 5 love languages on the 7 Footsteps podcast. And just to give some context, last week we discussed the 5 love languages, and a lot of the times the conversation was kind of going off into different directions, and we try to keep it on track, but we merit that the conversation that was tracking off had value. So we decided that we were going to do a separate podcast about all of those. Jordan has collected a few questions that contains most of the essence of those diverging conversations, and so this is a continuation of the 5 love languages, but not necessarily going to be about them. Right. Okay. Jordan.
So the first idea I want to discuss, I'm just going to start off with the quote from the book. Until he has the desire, encouraging words come across as judgmental and guilt-inducing. They don't express love, but rejection. So this is from the context encouraging words chapter in the 5 love languages. And the reason this stood out to me and I'd like to discuss it is because to me it explains a very misunderstood interaction in relationships, which is, for lack of better example, saying something encouraging to the other person with the intention of love and just the complete opposite coming across. So, I see the potential for you to be such a strong, well-built man. So I think you should go to the gym. And oftentimes that expressed to the partner that, oh, you want me to go to the gym, is like, dude, are you saying that I'm skinny? Are you saying that I'm not strong enough for you? So if I read the quote again, it kind of gives the answer to that. But first, what do you take from that?
I understand that. I think you'd really have to interrogate yourself to ask, is what I'm saying with the intent of love? Because if I see your potential to be a well-built individual, for me to want you to become that well-built individual, how does that add to being loved? I don't see that necessarily, but maybe that's just the example. But to kind of diverge from that comment, I think when you are communicating anything in that sense to another person, you need to take into account who that individual is and how they will take what you're saying. So certain people you can say that to, and in certain relationships, when that is expressed, the other person will be much more receiving. But to focus on the individuals who are not, who do take it that way, who I would say most likely have fundamentally more emotional instability or insecurity, those individuals, you'll have to communicate it differently. And one suggestion I would say is in the form of a question. The beauty of questions is very powerful. And if, in this example, if you tell the other person or ask the other person, listen, do you want to be a well-built individual?
You already hurt my feelings.
No, I'm asking you.
No, you hurt my feelings already.
Okay, why?
Why are you asking? Are you implying that I'm not?
No, I see all these people, and I know you can be that person, and I'm wondering, do you not want to be that person? Have you not found the time? What is the reason?
I haven't thought about it. Now I feel like I'm not good enough for you.
Well, that's your problem. No, man, you're making this unnecessary. But you get the point. I think in the way it gets communicated, maybe I didn't do it the best way, but in the way you communicate these things, you can avoid that individual to feel criticized through your statement. But ultimately the person can always feel criticized. And that, I think, is fundamentally because of emotional insecurity, not because of what you're saying.
So actually not from the person that's saying it, but from the person receiving it. It's interesting you say that, because I actually have a slightly different perspective. I think some things you just can't say them. No matter how well you say them, the idea itself, when landed, will be hurtful on the precondition that the book states, which is if they don't have the desire themselves, the encouraging word, as nice as it comes across, will be felt as rejection. So, and that's just my personal experience as well, is, man, you can say things in twisted ways, but if they don't have the desire to do that, and then they realize you're saying maybe they should, it comes across as rejection. And to your credit, from a place of insecurity or inadequacy of like, oh, is this person implying that I'm not good enough because I don't have this thing? So really the idea from the book to me is a word of caution, or a guideline as to when you can use certain encouraging words. Because remember, your intention is to love the person, not to change the person. And if your intention is to love the person, your job is just to identify when they have the desire and then bring encouraging words in, not what you think they could be and should be. So if you think someone, and it's tricky because if you see the potential in your partner, let's say to be a great public speaker and, encourage the whole, you're like, you need to do this, you need to do this. And if they don't have the desire to do it, what then? Because this is great potential. So as a loving partner, you see how great they could be. But under the precondition that they don't have the desire to do it, it just doesn't have, it's not encouraging, it's not loving.
Well, yeah, I guess it does. For me, it keeps going back to the way it's said. And using the gym example, if I tell you, wow, you have really good genetics. Mm-hmm. You could really be a bodybuilder if you wanted to. And then I leave it at that. In no way am I suggesting, expressing, expecting. I'm simply mentioning that and pointing you towards noticing that potential within yourself. I think the problem here becomes as soon as you articulate it in a way that that's going to add to the way that individual loves you, maybe that's why it can become criticism. But if it's just pointing the person towards their potential, I have no problem with that. And I don't see how that can be offensive or sit as criticism.
Then the question comes in, why are you pointing them towards their potential?
No, because you love them. You want the best for them.
So it's weird though, because this book, then we're kind of at a point of divergence here. The book is not about how to love your partner. It's about how to make them feel loved. And what if those are two different ideas?
I think it is definitely very different. I think to be loved and to feel loved are two entirely separate categories, which we mix up so much.
Can we go into that?
Yeah.
I think the most easy example of that is a toxic relationship where you have had some very demented idea of love based on your parents. Perhaps you had a very dysfunctional household. And the way that you feel loved or at home is through some sort of, I don't know, like a superiority thing happening in the house. Like, it's perhaps a bad example, but the point still stands. I think many people have a toxic idea of what love is and toxic requirements to feel loved. So now, how do we deal with that? Do they deserve to feel loved, or do you have to change? Can you even change that? Are they doomed for life?
I categorize these things. Maybe this is not a direct answer to your question, but I categorized to feel loved as the feeling of value, being valued, and acceptance. And if I innately feel those things, I feel loved. But to be loved is simply a matter of fact and evidence. So you could be doing every single thing in your power to love me. And if those things do not make me feel loved, does that mean I am not loved? I would say no. I would say the fact of love, and that's where it comes to self-sacrifice. That's where it comes to doing the acts of love, even when you don't feel like you should. But it's because you love the individual. When you choose to love the individual, that you do these things. And the problem is, in society today, we are obsessed with feeling loved, and we equate not feeling loved with not being loved. And that's the problem. And Jordan Peterson says something very, very, every time I hear it, I'm like, dang, that's why society is so sad. And it's the concept of thinking about yourself is equivalent to being depressed. He says it's the exact same mind state. And if you are like thinking about yourself the whole time, thinking about how you feel, do I feel loved, do I feel valued, do I feel accepted, you keep thinking about how you feel. And that's the same mentality as being depressed. And or not necessarily depressed, miserable was the actual word he used, but I think they're quite the same. And this is a bit of a tangent within our tangent conversation. The problem with seeking to feel loved, and it's different for men and women. And I read a book a while ago called Wild at Heart, and the guy writes about what it is a man's heart desires and seeks, and the same for women. Now he categorizes it as three things. It's a man in his heart desires a battle to fight, a adventure to live, and a beauty to rescue. And the problem is with those second two, the second and the third, people mix them up. People think the adventure is a beauty to rescue. And he pitches the concept as, for me to go out on an adventure is something I desire to do every day in my heart. And we as men know this. We want to explore. We want to see new things. We want to build new things. We want to create. Life is an adventure, and we will always seek out that adventure. And as soon as you see or seek that adventure within a woman, to rescue the woman is to live that adventure. The problem becomes when you get the woman. Now it's like, okay, the adventure is over. And no, it's not. Now it's a relationship. Now pursuing her is the adventure. The problem there is that a woman, she has in her heart the desire to accompany someone on their great adventure, to be the partner in that adventure. And some women might disagree with me, but he says that is, I'm not wording it perfectly. I didn't write it down, unfortunately, but his wording is a bit better. But that's in her heart. And the problem becomes, if the man seeks her to be the adventure, then as soon as she's the adventure, she can't accompany him on the exploration of herself, because she knows herself. There's no adventure for her there. So that's kind of the whole thing. If a man has got these goals and he's got this career path he wants to, pave the way at, women find that attractive. Women want to be with this man who's got this goal in life, and they want to help him get there. And that's my perspective. Obviously, I'm not a woman. But see, this all comes down to the fact that as long as you are looking within yourself to feel loved, and you feel that feeling in the pursuit of a woman and everything, and you keep looking at, okay, this is good, I like this, eventually it'll end. Eventually, to feel loved will no longer be there, but to be loved will be the only one. And then if you equate those two to each other, the marriage will end in a divorce, as we often see they do these days, because the feeling is not there. And I think we're absolutely obsessed with the feeling.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, he gave a very small example that I think articulates that idea very well. Love and the idea of love is so powerful that when people are chasing it and they find it for a brief moment, nothing else matters. All of a sudden, the assignment you have for next week just doesn't seem that important anymore. And that really says something about the significance that you feel when you feel loved, which is really ties into a man's purpose. He needs a purpose. He needs an adventure, like kind of using those words together. And that feels exactly like what an adventure feels like. And now, where does that lead when it's just the pursuit of the feeling of love with
Yeah.
another person. Definitely a big word of caution there.
Yeah, I would just say that if life is all about love, it's going to be very sad if you understand love as a feeling.
Right, this is actually a really tough concept that's only come up in the podcast now. But I think we'll transition now. But really, just to put a stamp on it, is to say, well, this book is all about feeling loved. But how important is it to feel loved, and what's the difference between actual love and
Yeah.
feeling loved?
So-
Can those always coexist, or can they sometimes be mutually exclusive?
I think, yeah, we should separate them to the act of loving, to be loved and to feel loved, and now further discuss the art of making your partner feel loved, because I definitely think that that is necessary. You know, you want them to have that feeling. They shouldn't be dependent on it. That's a problem. But the art of making your partner feel loved is something that I think is a beautiful skill and will just bring them more joy. Like, why not be good at making them feel that?
Well, you could say that loving them is the first step, and the second step is making them feel loved. Because sometimes loving them does make them feel loved, but not always.
That's
but
true.
then you do really need to go into what is love. And in my opinion, that comes based on what you believe in, your faith. Or I don't know where else you draw that from fundamentally, because when you start doing all the whys, it goes down to what you believe. And the Bible answers that quite well.
You can also look at like parents. Tough love is a good example. I love my child, and therefore I will do things to them that they don't like, and they don't make them. It doesn't make them feel loved, but I do it because I love them. And if I ask you, would you ever want your partner to have tough love on you for your benefit?
Yeah, I would say yes.
But as soon as you in that moment and you don't feel like your partner loves you anymore, will you still say yes?
Yeah, it's weird, because that's an intentional expression of love that you request that doesn't make you feel love. So it's a good example of the difference between expression of love, actual love, and expression of love with the intention to make the person feel loved. There is a difference.
There is, and I think this is a completely momentary thought here. I think that's one of the beauties of marriage. It is, I commit my life to live it with you, and I believe that through the thick and thin, you will always love me. So that to some extent, I trust when I don't feel loved, you do still love me, and that it will be to my benefit to suffer that extent. And I might not always feel loved, but it's not about feeling loved. It's about the act of choosing to love each other, and to choose now, or to promise, or to commit to love in the choice. Because obviously when people get married, they don't promise the other person will feel loved for the rest of their life together, but they will be loved for the rest of it. And that's different, guys. But moving on.
Yeah, we're basically trying to explain away the book now. But yeah, still contextualizes it very nicely. So kind of a thing I thought about here, and it really comes down to when you read all of these books about self-improvement, habits come up a lot. Like habits. You know, if it's a good thing in your life, then you must make it a habit. And when you make it a habit, then, you know, you don't have to think when you do it anymore. It's not so emotionally tough to do it. So I thought, you know, in the way that he gives so many stories, people will develop their expressions of love into a habit. And I thought, now, okay, so is this a good thing? Now you can use all these principles of habits and apply them to love expression. So, okay, now I want to make it a habitual thing to love my partner in the way that they will feel loved. But then I started to think, an unfortunate good thing and bad thing about it is the concept of desensitization. So I wonder, and you mentioned it, when you constantly offer an expression of love, even if it is their love language, doesn't that lead to desensitization? You always like mopping the floor as an expression of love now because, you know, acts of service or whatever. But now you do it all the time. After some time, it's like, well, that's the baseline now. What's next? And we are beings of acclamation. We always acclimate.
Mm-hmm.
So there is an idea that in the book of like, no, you just consistently express the love language. But now it seems to be an ever climbing ladder of, well, new baseline, climb higher, new baseline,
Mm-hmm.
climb higher.
Mm-hmm.
So do you have the same understanding?
Yeah.
Does desensitization apply in this context or not?
I see it the same. I use a different word. I've actually discussed this with a few people back in the day. I call it the threshold.
Mm-hmm.
And we see this with, let's use an example, dopamine. You know, the more of it you get, the higher your threshold gets for what you need to be satisfied. And we all know over a period of time, you're just going to feel depressed because you can never hit that baseline anymore. So I think that's kind of also what happens when you fall in love. I think everything is just great. Everything is just great. Everything is just great. And then all of a sudden you start falling out of love, not because necessarily the love is less, but the feelings are like, okay, it's the same. Because you can only be in love for so long, you can only be doing something like a surprise with flowers, and that's like, oh, the rush of dopamine, what a great partner. And by the 10th time they do it, it's like, okay, this is very nice, my partner does this for me on occasion. And did you see it kind of declines? I don't know if the picture I'm drawing makes sense. This is the first time I've drawn in my head as well, but I'm exploring the thought of maybe we don't fall out of love, but our threshold for what being in love increases, and how you must feel to consider it the feeling of being in love. And because, yes, threshold grows every time something happens and every time the partner does something, that's maybe why people fall out of love. I don't know.
But then can't you systematically only express love in intervals where there's a recovery from the dopamine spike? And then, so for instance, giving flowers every single day versus once a week. So, and I mean, this is a common, why we only give presents once a year. We don't do it every day. And that makes it special every time you receive one.
Not, I wouldn't say that to me. Personally, I think, well, maybe because gifts are so low on my list, but, I'm like, why do we celebrate birthdays? I question that whole
So
thing.
you didn't like your birthday present?
I don't say it makes me feel loved. That's what I would
bought
say.
him a birthday present.
But the point I'm getting to is, I understand what you're saying. I do think that interval based, you can spread it out, but I think there's actually a better way of approaching this.
Oh, yes.
I think the fact, and maybe this goes to the love languages, the fact that that person has never been married before. I want to say in a relationship, but most people have dated multiple people. But if you haven't, that's good. That's great. Because this makes, when the first time you're in a relationship, so much better. Because the not to contradict what I said earlier, but the adventure of love, trying to figure out what the other person's individual love languages are and how much each of them have value and less value, and how that changes over time possibly. I think the whole exploration of finding out what makes that person feel loved is an adventure in itself. And I think when you testing out the waters here and you're testing out the waters there and you're testing it out over there, you're always going to be jumping around. So it's never going to be so repetitive. If I only gave you flowers as an act of love, yes, that'll desensitize. But because love is so broad and can be done in so many ways, being the 5 love languages, only being categories in which there's multiple dialects, and the whole exploration of that, because the person who's never been loved and never been married doesn't know how that feels. So getting to do each and every one of those acts, I think, prevents the whole concept of desensitization.
Okay, so if I had to summarize that, it's like you're shifting the framing of marriage from a maintenance, like consistent maintenance, just, needs this every now and then, to like a brand discovery. I learn something new about her every day, and I express that through what I'm doing, and it's interesting, and I like her. So it's a different way of looking at it. But I do think if you apply a 10-year time frame to that, it becomes difficult, because that's when I wonder then, why do people slip into the routine? And it's perhaps just because they're not intentional about their exploration, which is a generic answer.
Perhaps it was that they put in a lot of effort, and it wasn't received well, in the sense of the individual didn't feel or express their appreciation for the love, so they were like, this is not fun. I am not enjoying this adventure, or I'm not enjoying pursuing what makes you feel loved, because if I do it wrong, I get backlashed, or whatever. So maybe it's not necessarily time, but the way the relationship develops. But I truly believe, and obviously I don't have experience with being married, so I cannot say for sure, but I truly believe that love can be cultivated, and if it is cultivated correctly, it will never run out and never desensitize. Oh, maybe that's me being wishful or romantic, but that's what I choose to believe.
Yeah, I think there's a very important aspect that you bring up of intentionality within the, you call it cultivating, but that idea seems like if you reap it well, it'll sow forever.
I think there's a nuance to that. Maybe I should just mention that. If that, maybe this is what people do wrong as well. If that partner is your sole focus for those 10 years, it's like planting and sowing your lands every year, and it'll run out. And I think the problem is if that individual is your sole focus and time and effort, and the exploration of the love is everything, yes, maybe by 10 years you'll just be so tired of each other. But that's why that person should not be it. They should not be the adventure. They should join you in the adventure, and during the adventure there be this side quest, these times you spend together, the enjoyment of the adventure taken home, and that being a continuation of it, and that excitement being cultivated. But I think, yes, if you water the plant every day, it'll die, kind of concept. Not to be like, I'm not going to give you water when it's clearly wanting water, but I think
that's very interesting, your aspect of that, because the way that you describe it is there's an outside of the home, if there's an expression of purpose and creativity, then when you come home, that brings color into the relationship.
that as well, yeah.
The way that the book actually kind of frames it the other way around and says, well, for you to express creativity outside of your relationship, you need to have your love tank full at home. That like really promotes you to go out and just be able to very easily interact with the world and not seek love in the world, but to know, so we don't need to go too deep into that.
You could bounce off of each other.
You can bounce off each other, but I think we've discussed that enough.
Yeah.
Right.